the last episode, my Giulia Ti Daily Driver died. I discovered that the cause of that failure was my hydraulic clutch conversion and the too long stroke of the old mechanical pedal, leading to a cracked mainspring in the pressure plate. That's not too difficult to repair, but the condition of everything else on the engine and in the engine bay is so much worse than I thought. So, in for a penny, in for a pound. In this episode, I will get way off into the weeds repairing what I can on this engine and gearbox before I put it back in the car. But first up, the engine, gearbox, and car itself need a thorough degreasing. This is a water-based degreaser. With some scrubbing and high pressure blasting, most of the oil comes loose and can be washed away. Okay, now that I can actually see what I'm working with, what's my aim for this engine and gearbox and for the car? The clutch repair is very simple. I'm going to replace it with a brand new second-hand pressure plate that came out of one of my old GTVs and install an actually new friction plate. But there are so many little things that add up to this car being a pain to live with, and I'll address them as I find them, but for now, I need to stop the oil leaks. It took ages to get all of this clean, so there's no point in throwing in a new clutch and letting that engine throw its oil out all over the engine bay again. I suspect that a large part of the problem is the front and rear main oil seals on the crankshaft, but also the rev counter and speedometer drive seals. These little output drives are often overlooked in engine rebuilds, and the one on the water pump, which drives the rev counter, can leak oil onto the fan belt and is then flung all over the engine bay. The rear oil seal on a 105 series is often a source of trouble. Oil doesn't just get past the seal itself sometimes, but around the whole fifth main bearing cap, which is why this is covered in silicone gasket maker. The front crank seal is in bad shape, but I think an even bigger issue was this crank pulley. It's cracked along the oil seal surface, a common problem on these engines. I'm going to replace it with a spare pulley I had in my parts collection and repair that original pulley sometime in the future. The speedometer drive on the gearbox has the same seal and the same problem as the rev counter drive. However, the speedometer on this car hasn't worked for a long time. I thought it might have a snapped cable or an issue in the cluster itself, but when I put the end of the cable in a drill, it works. The issue seems to be that the shaft that drives the cable is rounded off where the square cut cable is supposed to fit, so it just spins with no rotation being transferred to the cable. I have a replacement shaft that is in much better condition and grips the cable properly, so I'll use this in my rebuild. The seal looks original and has gone very hard over time. It's the same story for the seal on the speedometer drive. Here are the two drive shafts after polish with new seals. Let's hope this helps reduce oil leaks. I made a mistake when ordering my replacement seal for the rear of the gearbox. It's 7mm wide when it should have been 10. It's not ideal, but it will still work. And time is in short supply with this project, so I'm just going to use it. I'm replacing the output flange on the gearbox for a different one, because I need a different gear to get a correct speedometer reading. About 2 years ago, I changed the differential on this car from a 5.1 to a 4.55. I didn't change these gears at the time. There are so many different gears for both the output flange and the speedometer drive, but I have this Google document about it all, which I've linked in the description below. I need to change from an 8-tooth flange to a 9-tooth flange. The small gear on the speedometer drive is the same for both 5.1 and 4.55 applications. The rev counter drive is much simpler. It just is what it is, universal across all 105 engines. No fussing required. Now I can install new front and rear main crank seals, and the flywheel and the crank pulley. Another suspected source of oil leaks is this oil filter housing and adapter. It looks as if it's been rubbing against the engine mount, and the grooves are so deep that the O-ring seal is exposed. I don't know if this is a source of oil leaks, but I'm going to change it out anyway with a second-hand unit that I have that's in better condition. It has similar marks, but nowhere near as bad. While I have everything torn apart, I'm going to clean up the exhaust manifolds with some simple high heat black paint, the kind of thing you'd use to repaint an old wood burning oven. It's cheap, easy, and it holds up well. I'm installing some new exhaust gaskets with copper sealant, and some new hardware. I'm not going to do many cosmetic upgrades during this round of work, but this one is definitely worth it. I'm going to remove the inlet manifold as well. I need to get to the carburetor mounts. These aluminium mounts are quite old. They have a groove machined into the mount itself for the O-rings. I've heard it's better to have the O-ring independent in its own washer, like this new set of mounts. I just happen to have this set laying around, so I'm going to install it and see how it goes. Will they really make a difference in improving vibration isolation? I don't know, but it's worth a shot. Now onto something a little more serious. For a while, when I started this engine, it rattled for a second or two, and then it would quieten down. Maybe the small end bearings were worn. No, it turns out it was the timing chain. It has far too much slack in it. This is my fault. I should have checked this when I did services, but by now I'm sure you've all guessed that this car didn't get serviced. Well, not properly at least. Too bad to tune was always my opinion. Even with the chain tension set properly, the TDC markings don't line up like they should. Are these TDC markings even in the right place? I don't know. So now might also be a good time to check the valve clearances. I'm sure you could have guessed this, but almost all of them are out of spec. Some of them badly out. And this is not such a simple thing to fix. This engine is much worse than I thought it would be, but I am quite pleased with how far it's come in this episode. But that said, I have a lot of work ahead of me setting up the valve train and the timing the way it should be, and that will be its own episode. So I'll leave things here and let you go. Thanks again for watching.